You ever come back from what was supposed to be a blissful, rejuvenating 3-week family vacation, tanned and relaxed, only to find a completely different family enjoying brunch in your kitchen? Using your meticulously curated artisanal sourdough starter like it's a community potluck? Yeah, I didn't think so. It's the kind of scenario that sounds like a fever dream, or maybe a badly written sitcom pilot. But for me, it was the jarring reality that slammed into us like a rogue wave the moment we pulled into our driveway. Drop a comment below. Let me know where you're watching from, because this story is one for the ages, a tale of HOA overreach so extreme, it borders on the surreal. I suspect I might have inadvertently shattered the world record for the shortest period of post-vacation zen before plunging headfirst into what I can only describe as high-stakes suburban warfare. Our vacation had been perfect. 3 weeks exploring national parks with my spouse and our 2 kids. Think crackling campfires, stunning vistas, and that rare, beautiful silence only nature provides. We'd meticulously planned it for over a year. Our house, a comfortable 2-story in a supposedly quiet, well-maintained neighborhood, was left in the care of, well, nobody specific. We had timers on lights, asked a neighbor to grab the mail, the usual precautions. Our HOA, presided over by the indomitable Karen, and yes, her name was actually Karen, a detail that felt almost too on the nose, was usually more concerned with the precise shade of beige your mailbox was painted, or the regulation length of your lawn. Annoying, yes, but hardly criminal. Or so I thought. The first sign that our re-entry into normal life was going to be anything but normal was the unfamiliar sedan parked squarely in our driveway. A cherry-red convertible, flashy and ostentatious, completely out of place. My spouse shot me a puzzled look. "Did you forget a friend was borrowing the house?" they asked. I wish. My blood pressure did a little preparatory spike. We parked on the street, a knot of unease tightening in my stomach. As we approached our front door, we could hear music, loud, upbeat pop music that was definitely not on any of our playlists. Then, through the sheer curtains of our dining room window, we saw them. A family of 4, complete strangers, laughing as they passed around a platter of what looked suspiciously like my emergency stash of gourmet cookies. My jaw, I believe, literally dropped. I remember fumbling for my keys, my hand shaking slightly, a mixture of disbelief and outrage bubbling up. I threw the door open, probably a little more forcefully than intended. The music screeched to a halt as 4 pairs of eyes swiveled towards us, their expressions shifting from relaxed enjoyment to startled confusion. Can we help you?" The man, mid-40s, paunchy, wearing a Hawaiian shirt that had clearly seen better days, asked. He had a smear of chocolate at the corner of his mouth. "Help me?" I sputtered. "You're in my house. Who the heck are you?" The woman, his wife, presumably, clutched a half-eaten cookie to her chest. "We rented it," she said, her voice a little shaky. "For the week. Through the local manager? A very helpful lady, Karen." Karen! My mind reeled. Our Karen? The HOA president Karen? The one who'd once sent us a violation notice because our garden gnome was, and I quote, exhibiting undue whimsy? It couldn't be. But the couple seemed genuinely bewildered. The man pulled out his phone and showed me an email exchange. It was brief, amateurish, but it detailed a week-long rental agreement for our address, complete with a price that made my eyes water, apparently, by. Our home had been marketed as a luxury suburban retreat. And the contact person, the one who had apparently met them, given them keys, my spare set, from where? And collected a hefty cash deposit? Karen. The signature line on the crudely typed rental agreement simply read, Property Management Services, but the email address was one I vaguely recognized from some of the more aggressive HOA communications. My spouse was already on the phone with the police, while I tried to process the sheer audacity. Our sanctuary, our home, had been turned into an illicit Airbnb by the very person tasked with upholding community standards. The temporary tenants, let's call them the Hendersons, were as much victims as we were, albeit clueless ones. They'd paid good money in cash directly to Karen. They had no idea the property manager was a fraud and the legitimate owners were about to walk in. The police arrived, 2 young officers who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. Initially, they were inclined to call it a civil matter, a landlord-tenant dispute, until we vehemently explained we were the owners and had never authorized any rental. Seeing our IDs, the mail piling up with our name on it, and the genuine shock on our faces, they started to take it more seriously. The Hendersons, to their credit, looked mortified and quickly began gathering their belongings, apologizing profusely. They'd been duped, plain and simple. But the real target of my rapidly solidifying fury was Karen. How dare she? And more importantly, what else was she capable of? As an architect, I'm used to dealing with complex regulations and occasionally difficult personalities, but this was a whole new level of unhinged. This wasn't just a violation of bylaws. This was a violation of our home, our privacy, our peace of mind. And I was already starting to formulate a plan. Karen had no idea who she just messed with. She thought she was pulling a fast one on some unsuspecting homeowners. She didn't realize she'd just kicked a hornet's nest with a PN designation and a penchant for meticulous, systematic dismantling of problems. This wasn't just going to be about getting our house back. This was going to be about making sure Karen understood the full consequences of her actions. The immediate aftermath was a blur of changing locks, checking for damages, thankfully minimal, though they'd made a serious dent in our pantry, and trying to calm our bewildered kids. The Hendersons, once they understood the gravity of the situation and that Karen had essentially scammed them, were surprisingly cooperative. They provided copies of their emails with Karen, a description of her, and a detailed account of how she'd given them access, even pointing out she'd used a key from a lockbox hidden under a specific potted plant on our porch, a spare I'd forgotten was even there. Classic rookie mistake on my part, but pure criminal opportunism on hers. That night, we stayed in a hotel, unable to stomach the thought of sleeping in our own beds knowing strangers had been there under such bizarre circumstances. My mind, however, was far from restful. It was racing, piecing together the puzzle, the sheer unmitigated gall of Karen's scheme. She must have seen us packing the car, known we were going for an extended period, and decided to turn our home into her personal cash cow. The audacity was breathtaking. The next morning, I was a man on a mission. My architectural training emphasizes precision, evidence, and understanding systems. I decided to approach this like one of my more complex projects. Define the problem, gather all relevant data, analyze weaknesses, and then execute a flawless solution. The first order of business was hard evidence. We had security cameras, a fairly standard setup covering the front door and driveway. I'd been meaning to upgrade to a more comprehensive system, and this incident solidified that resolution. I retrieved the SD cards, my heart pounding with a mixture of dread and anticipation. And there it was, clear as day. Karen, unmistakable in her usual attire of a brightly colored, slightly too tight power suit, and her signature oversized sunglasses, confidently striding up our walkway. Footage showed her fumbling with the spare key lockbox, letting the Hendersons in, even giving them a little tour of our porch, pointing things out like she owned the place. The timestamp correlated perfectly with the Hendersons' arrival. This was the smoking gun for her direct involvement in the unauthorized access and illegal rental. I saved multiple copies, uploaded them to secure cloud storage, and felt a grim sense of satisfaction. This wasn't just an accusation anymore, it was a documented fact. My next step was to understand the full scope of Karen's operation. Was this a one-off, or was she running some sort of clandestine neighborhood rental empire? I spoke to a few trusted neighbors. Old Mrs. Blank Henderson from across the street, a sweet lady who spent most of her days tending her prize-winning roses, mentioned seeing Karen around our house a bit more than usual while we were away. I thought she was just being extra diligent, dear, she'd said, but she did seem awfully pleased with herself. Another neighbor, Mark, a fellow professional who'd had his own run-ins with Karen over the height of his fence, was less surprised. That woman, he'd muttered, shaking his head, she runs this HOA like it's her personal fiefdom. Wouldn't put anything past her, especially if there's a buck in it. His words resonated. Karen's demeanor had always been one of supreme self-importance. Her car, a late-model luxury SUV that seemed a bit rich for someone on a volunteer HOA president's, well, lack of stipend. Where was her money coming from? This line of thought led me to a rather intriguing idea. As part of my long-term investment strategy, I, through a very discreetly managed LLC, owned several rental properties scattered across various neighborhoods, including a few in our own. It was a side venture, something I enjoyed, managing assets and ensuring good quality housing for tenants. I'd always kept it separate from my personal life. Most people, including my neighbors, had no idea about this aspect of my financial portfolio. A thought, wild and improbable, began to form. What if? What if Karen, or members of her board, were tenants in one of my properties? The irony would be almost too perfect. I'm not usually one for dramatic coincidences, but the universe has a funny way of setting the stage sometimes. I made a mental note. As soon as I was back in my office, I'd pull up the records for my LLC's holdings in our zip code. The thought of Karen unknowingly paying rent to the very person whose home she'd just brazenly turned into an illegal hotel brought the first genuine smile to my face since this whole ordeal began. It was a long shot, but if it panned out, well, that would change the entire calculus of my response. My anger was slowly morphing into a cold, clear determination. Karen had picked a fight with the wrong homeowner. She was about to find out that I didn't just design buildings, I could also deconstruct her little empire, brick by fraudulent brick. The investigation was just getting started, and I had a feeling the foundations of Karen's reign were about to experience some serious structural integrity issues. The first thing Monday morning, I was on the phone with my lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Sarah, who had handled all my LLC's real estate transactions. I laid out the entire sordid tale, the vacation, the illegal tenants, Karen's starring role in the security footage, the Hendersons' testimony. Sarah listened patiently, her occasional MHMs punctuated by the faint clicking of her keyboard. "Okay," she said when I'd finished. "Trespassing, fraud, unjust enrichment. We've got a veritable buffet of charges here. The footage is gold. We'll draft a cease and desist for her property management services that'll singe her eyebrows, and then we'll talk damages." But before she could continue, I interjected. "Sarah, there's something else. A bit of a long shot, but I need you to check the tenant rolls for all properties held by Willow Creek Holdings LLC in the 90,210 zip code. Well, our actual zip code. You know what I mean. Specifically, I'm looking for a Karen Miller and maybe a few of her known associates on the HOA board, like a Tom Wilson or a Brenda Jenkins." Sarah paused. "You think she's one of your tenants?" she asked, a note of intrigue in her voice. "It's a hunch," I replied. "But if it's true, it adds a rather delightful layer to this whole mess." I spent the next hour at my desk, reviewing my LLC's portfolio myself, while Sarah did her own cross-referencing. My heart hammered against my ribs. It was almost too good to be true, too much of a pro-revenge trope to happen in real life. And then, I saw it. Karen Miller, tenant at 128 Azalea Lane, 3 streets over from my own. The lease was current, signed 18 months ago for a nice 3-bedroom rancher that Willow Creek Holdings had acquired as part of a larger portfolio. My breath hitched. Not only Karen, but a quick cross-reference of the HOA board members list, helpfully available on the community website, against my tenant database, revealed that Tom Wilson, the HOA treasurer and Karen's most vocal supporter, was renting 45 Rosewood Court, and Brenda Jenkins, the secretary, notorious for her nitpicky minutes and Karen's staunchest defender, she was at 210 Oakview Drive, all 3 of them, tenants of mine. Unbeknownst to them, their landlord was the very person Karen had just so spectacularly wronged. A slow, wolfish grin spread across my face. This wasn't just a long shot. It was a slam dunk. The universe hadn't just set the stage. It had handed me the entire script, a director's chair, and a megaphone. The upcoming HOA monthly meeting was scheduled for Wednesday evening. Perfect. I told Sarah the news, and I could almost hear her smile through the phone. "Well, well, well," she said. "This complicates things for her in the most delicious way. So, what's the plan, Maestro?" The plan was simple, yet devastating. We would let Karen walk right into the trap. I would attend the HOA meeting not as a victim, but as a homeowner with a serious grievance. I would present my evidence regarding the illegal rental of my home. I would watch her lie, deflect, and attempt to bulldoze her way through it, as was her style. And then, when she was at her most arrogant, her most dismissive, I would play my trump card. Or rather, Sarah, who I'd asked to accompany me as my legal counsel, would. The next 2 days were spent in meticulous preparation. I compiled a dossier, Enlarged stills from the security footage, printed copies of the Hendersons' emails and their sworn affidavit, which Sarah helped them draft, as they were eager to see Karen face consequences for duping them too. A detailed estimate of costs incurred, new locks, hotel stay, professional cleaning to remove the lingering scent of cheap air freshener and betrayal. I also had Sarah draft carefully worded letters to Miss Miller, Mr. Wilson, and Miss Jenkins. These weren't eviction notices, not yet. They were far more subtle. Formal notifications of upcoming property inspections by the landlord, perfectly legal under their lease agreements with a 24-hour notice, citing routine maintenance checks and ensuring adherence to community standards as stipulated in the lease agreement. The timing was no coincidence. These would be hand-delivered by a process server the day after the HOA meeting. Let them sweat a little first. The beauty of it was that Karen, in her capacity as HOA president, had often championed stricter enforcement of property upkeep and adherence to rules. Rules that were mirrored in the tenancy agreements for properties within the HOA's purview, including those owned by my LLC. She had, in essence, created the very standards that could be used against her. The irony was so thick, you could spread it on toast. I pictured Karen, in her expensive but invariably tasteless pantsuit, her face a mask of condescending superiority, completely unaware that the ground beneath her Gucci knockoff heels was about to give way. The HOA meeting couldn't come soon enough. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about restoring order, about demonstrating that abuse of power, no matter how petty the kingdom, has consequences. Wednesday evening arrived, cloaked in the sticky humidity of late summer. The community clubhouse, where HOA meetings were held, buzzed with the usual mix of disgruntled residents, a few apathetic onlookers, and Karen's core group of enablers on the board. Karen herself was in fine form, presiding from the head of a long folding table like a queen holding court. She wore a particularly garish leopard print blouse, her lips pursed in that familiar expression of strained patience, as if dealing with us mere mortals was a heavy burden. My spouse and I took seats in the front row, Sarah beside me, calm and composed, her briefcase resting on her lap. Karen's eyes flickered over me, a brief, almost imperceptible tightening around her mouth, before she moved on, launching into the meeting agenda with her usual brisk, self-important tone. We sat through tedious discussions about budget allocations for pet waste stations and the perennial debate over holiday decoration timelines. My pulse thrummed a steady, controlled rhythm. Patience. Finally, Karen announced, "New business? Any new business?" This was my cue. I stood up. "Yes, Karen, I have some new business." A murmur went through the small crowd. I rarely spoke at these meetings. Karen's smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "Ah, Mr. Johnson, and what pressing matter do you bring before the board today?" Her tone was laced with that particular brand of condescension she reserved for anyone who dared question her authority. "It concerns the rather unusual, and I must say highly illegal, rental of my private residence while my family and I were on vacation for the past 3 weeks." I stated, my voice clear and firm, echoing slightly in the suddenly silent room. Karen blinked. A flicker of something, surprise, annoyance, crossed her face, but she recovered quickly. "Rental? Mr. Johnson, I'm sure there's some misunderstanding. The HOA doesn't involve itself in private rental agreements, unless, of course, they violate community covenants, which, I trust, yours did not." She gave a tight, knowing little smile, as if she'd already outmaneuvered me. "Oh, there's no misunderstanding, Karen," I replied, my gaze unwavering. "And it most certainly violated several laws, not to mention every conceivable community covenant of decency and trust." I then proceeded to lay out the entire story, calmly and methodically. I described finding the Hendersons in our home. I mentioned their belief that they had rented it from a local property manager named Karen. At the mention of her name in this context, Karen scoffed. "This is outrageous. Are you accusing me of something, Mr. Johnson? I am the president of this homeowners association. I uphold the rules. I don't break them." Her voice rose, indignant. Her allies, Tom Wilson and Brenda Jenkins, nodded vigorously in support, muttering about slander and unfounded accusations. Perfect. She was reacting exactly as I'd anticipated. "Accusing? Not yet, Karen. Merely presenting facts," I said, then nodded to Sarah. "My legal counsel, Miss Proffer Davies, has some information she'd like to share." Sarah stood, opened her briefcase, and retrieved a small projector and a laptop. Within minutes, the blank wall behind the board table was illuminated. Sarah began, her voice cool and professional. "What you are about to see is security footage from Mr. Johnson's property, time-stamped during the period he and his family were away." The room was utterly silent as the footage played. Karen, clearly identifiable, letting the Hendersons into my house. Karen, waving goodbye to them from my porch. Gasps rippled through the audience. Karen's face had gone an alarming shade of pale, her leopard spots suddenly looking less power print and more sickly. "This footage it's doctored," she sputtered, her voice cracking. "It's a deep fake. This is a malicious attack," Tom Wilson chimed in. "Yeah, anyone could fake that. We also have sworn affidavits from Mr. and Mrs. Henderson." Sarah continued smoothly, unfazed, holding up a sheaf of papers, detailing their interactions with you, Karen, including descriptions of cash payments made directly to you for the rental of Mr. Patience Johnson's home. We have copies of the emails you exchanged with them from an address frequently used for HOA business, albeit under the guise of property management services. The color drained completely from Tom's and Brenda's faces as well now. They looked at Karen, then at me, then back at Karen, a dawning horror in their eyes. The other board members were shifting uncomfortably. The atmosphere in the room had turned electric. Karen opened her mouth, then closed it again, for once seemingly speechless. "The police have been informed and are very interested in this evidence of fraud, trespassing, and unlawful enrichment," I added, my voice quiet but carrying the weight of undeniable truth. The room erupted in murmurs. People were staring at Karen with open disbelief and disgust. Her reign was crumbling before her very eyes. But I wasn't finished, not by a long shot. Sarah cleared her throat, and a hush fell again. "And Ms. Miller," Sarah said, her gaze fixing on Karen, "there's one more rather pertinent detail concerning your suitability to manage anything, let alone an HOA. It seems in your zeal to play landlord with other people's property, you've been somewhat remiss in your own obligations, specifically to your actual landlord." Karen stared blankly. "My landlord? What are you talking about?" she stammered, her composure completely shattered. She looked like a cornered animal. This was the moment. I stepped forward again. "What Ms. Davies is referring to, Karen," I said, my voice resonating with a calm authority I didn't know I possessed until this moment, "is that the charming three-bedroom rancher you currently reside in at 128 Azalea Lane? It's owned by my company, Willow Creek Holdings, LLC. Which means, Karen, while you were busy illegally renting out my family home, you were, in fact, a tenant of mine." A collective gasp went through the room. You could have heard a pin drop on the industrial carpet. Karen's jaw literally fell open. Her eyes, wide and incredulous, darted from me to Sarah and back again. The leopard print seemed to wilt on her. "And Mr. Wilson," I continued, turning to the ashen-faced treasurer, "your residence at 45 Rosewood Court, also Willow Creek Holdings. Miss Jenkins," I added, my gaze shifting to the now trembling secretary, 210 Oakview Drive, same story." The silence in the room was deafening. The three of them looked as if they'd seen a ghost. Their little power structure, their cozy arrangement, had just been publicly and spectacularly detonated. Karen, the HOA tyrant, the self-proclaimed queen of the neighborhood, was not only exposed as a common fraudster, but was also, along with her key cronies, a tenant of the very man she had so arrogantly wronged. The look of utter devastation on her face was more satisfying than I could have ever imagined. The suburban warfare had just reached its turning point, and Karen was in full, disorganized retreat. The immediate fallout from that HOA meeting was, to put it mildly, catastrophic for Karen and her cabal. The moment the words, "You were in fact a tenant of mine," left my lips, the entire dynamic in that clubhouse shifted. The murmurs that had been suppressed erupted into outright calls for Karen's resignation. People who had previously cowered under her reign of nitpicky terror found their voices. "Fraud!" someone yelled from the back. "She used HOA resources!" another shouted, pointing at the email evidence Sarah had alluded to. Karen looked utterly broken, her face a mask of disbelief and dawning horror. Tom Wilson was sweating profusely, his collar suddenly looking 2 sizes too small, while Brenda Jenkins appeared to be on the verge of tears, muttering, "I knew it. I knew this would happen. My lawyer, Sarah, calmly suggested that perhaps Ms. Miller, Mr. Wilson, and Ms. Blank Jenkins might want to tender their resignations from the board, effective immediately to avoid further complications. Karen, bless her delusional heart, tried one last pathetic attempt at bluster. This is a conspiracy. You can't prove anything. I'll sue you for defamation, she shrieked, her voice cracking. Sarah simply raised an eyebrow. Miss Miller, we have video evidence, sworn affidavits, financial transaction queries pending, and now the rather awkward situation of your tenancy. I'd advise you to consult with your own legal counsel before making any further statements. As for your position on the board, I believe the community has made its feelings quite clear. Indeed, several larger, angrier homeowners were starting to advance towards the board table, their expressions grim. The remaining two board members, who were not my tenants and had always seemed more like reluctant followers than true believers in Karen's regime, quickly distanced themselves. Calling for an immediate vote of no confidence, it passed unanimously, with even Karen's cronies too stunned and scared to object. Within 15 minutes of my revelation, Karen was no longer HOA president. Tom and Brenda resigned their posts in disgrace shortly thereafter. The kingdom had crumbled. The next morning, as promised, a very professional process server delivered the formal notices of upcoming property inspections to Karen, Tom, and Brenda. I can only imagine their dread as they received those official-looking envelopes. The police, now armed with my comprehensive evidence package, had opened a formal investigation into Karen's fraudulent rental scheme. Detectives interviewed me, my spouse, and the Hendersons, who were remarkably cooperative, eager to see justice done. The wheels of actual justice, as opposed to HOA justice, were slowly but surely beginning to turn. For Karen, things went from bad to worse. The eviction notices weren't far behind. My LLC, Willow Creek Holdings, had perfectly legitimate grounds. For Karen, it was a straightforward end-of-lease term non-renewal. Her lease was fortuitously up in 60 days anyway. For Tom Wilson, we found several documented violations of his lease agreement regarding unauthorized alterations to the property. A poorly constructed deck he'd built without permission, which Karen, as HOA president, had conveniently ignored. Brenda Jenkins had a history of late rent payments, meticulously documented by my property manager. These weren't retaliatory evictions in the legal sense. These were contractual enforcements that I now had a very strong personal and professional motivation to pursue with vigor. They had, through their own actions and their association with Karen's illegal activities, demonstrated themselves to be undesirable tenants. The delicious irony was that Karen had often wielded the HOA covenants and rules like a weapon to intimidate residents. Now the very concept of adhering to rules and contractual obligations was being used to dismantle her life in the neighborhood. She fought it, of course. There were tearful phone calls to my LLC's property management office, which of course routed them to Sarah, vague threats. Even a cringeworthy attempt at an apology delivered to my doorstep via a wilted bouquet of supermarket flowers, which I politely declined. She tried to rally support, but her credibility was shot. No one wanted to be associated with her. The eviction processes moved forward, legally and methodically. It took a couple of months, the law being what it is, but eventually, Karen Miller, Tom Wilson, and Brenda Jenkins were all legally compelled to vacate the properties owned by my LLC. Watching the moving trucks pull away from their respective houses was a moment of quiet, profound satisfaction. The flashy red convertible the Hendersons had driven was long gone, but Karen's own late-model luxury SUV, now probably a significant financial burden without her illicit income streams, seemed to sag a little as it drove out of the neighborhood for the last time. And then came the truly cathartic part of my pro-revenge. Kicked all of them out was Phase 1. Phase 2 was rented out their houses too. Once the properties were vacated, I didn't just let them sit. I had them professionally cleaned, made a few tasteful upgrades, new paint, modern fixtures, the kind of improvements Karen would have fined someone else for doing without triplicate forms. Then, Willow Creek Holdings LLC, under my discreet direction, listed them for rent, this time with legitimate professional property management. We screened tenants carefully, prioritizing responsible families and individuals who would contribute positively to the community. Within a month, all 3 houses had new occupants. I made it a point to personally, and discreetly from a distance, see the new families moving in. A young couple with a baby into Karen's old place, a friendly doctor and his wife into Tom's, a quiet, retired librarian into Brenda's. The sight of new, happy life filling those spaces, replacing the toxicity and entitlement that had resided there before, was the ultimate victory. I hadn't just evicted a problem, I had actively improved the neighborhood, one rental property at a time. The houses themselves seemed to breathe easier, free from the oppressive aura of their previous tenants. And yes, the rental income was a nice bonus, a tangible reminder that sometimes doing good for the community and doing well financially can go hand in hand, especially when your antagonists practically hand you the keys to their downfall. The aftermath in our little suburban enclave was like a breath of fresh air after a stifling heat wave. With Karen and her chief enablers gone, a sense of normalcy and, dare I say, relief settled over the neighborhood. An emergency election was held for the HOA board, and a slate of reasonable, community-minded individuals stepped up. I was even approached to run, an idea I politely but firmly declined. My architect brain had had quite enough of HOA politics for one lifetime, thank you very much, though I did offer to consult on revising some of the more arcane and draconian bylaws Karen had instituted pro bono. The neighborhood meetings became less like tribunals and more like actual community discussions. The oppressive fear of receiving a violation notice for a slightly too vibrant petunia vanished. People started talking to each other more, a sense of camaraderie emerging that had been squashed under Karen's regime. As for Karen, her downfall was swift and comprehensive. The police investigation led to charges of fraud and theft by deception. Faced with the mountain of evidence, including the damning security footage and the Hendersons' unwavering testimony, she eventually pleaded guilty to lesser charges to avoid a harsher sentence. She received a hefty fine, probation, and a court order for restitution to the Hendersons and to my family for the costs we incurred. Last I heard, she'd moved to a different state, reportedly living in a much smaller, less glamorous apartment, her days of ruling over a suburban kingdom definitively over. Her luxury SUV was repossessed. A fitting end, I thought, for someone whose greed and arrogance knew no bounds. Tom and Brenda faded into obscurity, forced to find new rental accommodations, hopefully learning a valuable lesson about hitching your wagon to a falling, fraudulent star. My family and I recovered, of course. We upgraded our home security system. Fort Knox has nothing on us now. The kids still occasionally joke about the time the other family lived in our house. But the experience, as jarring as it was, taught me a valuable lesson. Never underestimate the audacity of entitled people, but also, never underestimate your own capacity to fight back when pushed too far. My specialized knowledge as an architect, with an understanding of process and structure, combined with my discreet real estate investments, provided the perfect toolkit for this particular brand of pro-revenge. It was as if my entire career and investment strategy had been leading up to this one bizarre confrontation. The sweetest revenge wasn't just Karen's downfall, but the positive transformation of the community. Seeing new, happy families move into the homes previously occupied by Karen and her cronies, knowing those properties were now managed ethically and professionally by my own company, was a daily reminder of our victory. It turned out those houses had excellent rental potential when handled with integrity. Our neighborhood is a better place now, quieter, friendlier. And sometimes, late at night, when I'm reviewing architectural plans or LLC statements, I allow myself a small, satisfied smile. Karen thought she was playing chess, but she didn't realize she was playing against a grandmaster who also happened to own the chessboard, the pieces, and the tournament hall. Let me know in the comments if you've ever had an HOA story even remotely as wild as this one, or if you've ever had to turn the tables on someone who truly deserved it. Hit that like button if you enjoyed this journey from vacation nightmare to landlord justice, and don't forget to subscribe for more tales of when keeping calm and carrying on just isn't an option. Sometimes, you have to strategically and legally burn it all down to build something better.